Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's session on the power of telematics and GIS. My name is Brian King. I'm a Government Business Development Manager here at Geotab, and I'm excited to be introducing you to the Esri team today as they provide us with an overview on their GIS platform. So more and more, we see that our customers are asking for us to leverage their existing GIS data within their AVL platform. So what we talk about a lot about here at Geotab is the unique open platform that the MyGeotab solution is built upon. So it's the expandability of the MyGeotab platform that allows us to utilize our customers' existing GIS data. So whether that's for the geospatial reporting that we have within our Public Works platform, or by just utilizing the data sets that we capture through our Go device that reside in MyGeotab, and our ability to push those into a customer's existing GIS database so they can make more informed decisions on how they go about utilizing their fleet and just increasing the overall operational efficiencies of the assets that they have in the field. So with that, I'm excited to turn it over to the Esri folks so they can go ahead and give us that overview of their solution.
Hello, everyone. My name is Arif Rafiq. I'm the Transportation Industry Manager with Esri Canada. I'm joined here with my colleague, Dave Monahan, who's the Industry Manager for IoT, or the Internet of Things. Today, we have a beautiful and fantastic presentation, at least I think so, to share with you. We're going to be talking about what could happen when you bring together the leading telematics provider and the leading GIS software provider. Put them together, and we'll see and reveal what kind of value that we can provide to our shared customers together as we bring these two together. And we've titled our presentation, See What Others Can't. If you're familiar with Esri, you may have seen those adverts. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. If not, no worries. Dave is going to introduce who Esri is in a moment. But we do have an exciting presentation. So why don't I just let Dave introduce Esri right away. Take it away, Dave.
All right. Thanks, Arif. So hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be part of this presentation here with Arif today. We really think that we've got some great content to share with you. As we go through that content, there really are two main things that I'd like you guys to keep in mind. So first and foremost, Esri's core business, which is the science of where, is one of the things I want you guys to keep in mind. And that really means that what we're focused on is bringing you some leading GIS software that really promotes the power of the map. And so that's the first thing. The second thing that I want you to keep in mind is that we want to show you how you can harness the power of the map within the world of IoT, Internet of Things, real data or real-time data, as well as big data analytics in that world. Right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to flip to the next slide, and we're just going to cover real quickly who Esri is, just in case some of you are not completely familiar with who we are. And so, Arif, I'm going to ask you to flip to the next slide, and then we're going to cover that real quick for you guys. So hopefully you've already heard of Esri before, but just in case you haven't, and to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's take a look at these bullet points here that really, I think, cover it at a high level. And so first and foremost, at least we like to think of ourselves as the global leader in geographic information systems, and that also covers things like location intelligence, mapping, and spatial analytics. The second bullet point, which we're also pretty proud of, is the strategic partnerships that we establish. And we do that with the likes of companies like Salesforce, Microsoft, Amazon, Geotab that's hosting us here today, as well as perhaps maybe even some of you guys that are watching this video right now. And then the third thing is that our technology is considered to be the de facto standard in all levels of government, be that federal, provincial, or local. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Arif, because that second bullet point that talks about partnerships, I think is an important one to talk about here today. We've got a whole bunch of partners that are on the or watching this video today. And so Arif, you've been with us a little bit longer than I have. And so why don't you talk about the power of these partnerships and what they get out of it?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. So I have been with Esri a little bit longer than you, but not all that long. I'm actually just going to be celebrating I did celebrate my 5-year anniversary just a month ago, actually.
There you go.
But one of the things I've noticed, thanks. One of the things I've noticed is even though, I've been here 5 years, I'm surrounded by individuals in this organization who have been here far longer and have lived and breathed GIS. You know, they went to school for GIS. They have masters in GIS. I'm not one of those. And why I think that's relevant is because I come from the transportation space. I've spent most of my career designing and deploying data management systems for road networks and highway networks and transportation networks in the US and in Canada and in East Asia. And one of the things I realized is that while I was working on that in the front end, on the back end, location was inherent in everything that I did, but I didn't really realize it until afterwards, right? So all these partnerships that are out here, one of the reasons this is important is because many of these partnerships that Esri forms throughout the globe, we allow them to continue to do what they do, but do it better through the power of location. In my realm, without location, how are you possibly actually managing transportation networks? It is so critical and important. It's woven through the fabric of a lot of the technology that we use today. And so Esri is a broad organization. It covers more than MySpace transportation. It's very wide. It's very tall. We have lots of different verticals that we cover. And so there's quite a bit that we do. And so as we go through this presentation, I challenge you to think about what we're talking about could benefit you and deliver value for your customers. So Dave and I are always talking about IoT and the Internet of Things. We had a conversation the other day about integration. So Dave, why don't you share that with the group?
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. Thanks, Arif. And so that's on the next slide here. Thanks for pulling that up here. So I think it's safe to say that, you know, all of us here watching this video understand the basic concepts of connected devices within the world of IoT. And specifically also the challenges that come with the volume and velocity of data that these systems produce, especially when you're thinking about, you know, how do you manage the storage for that and how do you process that into useful information, right? And Arif, you just talked about, you know, how we can integrate with a whole bunch of different kinds of data sources that are out there, different systems. There were partners that were mentioned on that slide that you were showing a couple of minutes ago. And that's all in the name of the science of where. And certainly that's a really compelling story. But what this capability is doing is it's providing our customers with a really exciting question here today, which is, what can I do with all this data? What else, right? I'm gathering all this data, but what else can I do? How can I apply some technology to go beyond just the data that I live with? And so when you're faced with this quickly evolving world of IoT and real-time and big data analytics, businesses are asking themselves the question, what is their play in this world? And this is where I think we can really help them out. I think we can help them out with our SaaS offering in a way where they can discover and derive new value-added services for their own customers. And so in a couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about an analogy that I use, which is the analogy of a pair of glasses to help explain some of these concepts. But before I do that, I'm going to hand it over or back over to Arif to talk about some example use cases and some of the challenges that come with it, because that's going to help put things into perspective, and then we'll get back to the analogy. So Arif, over to you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Dave. So as I dive into some of these use cases, bear in mind that, well, I shouldn't even say bear in mind. I think it's obvious that 80% or over 80% of the data that we use or sensor data that we use on a regular basis includes location information. I think most of us would agree with that. So if you think about how location information is used in reality or in the real world, one of the examples is personnel tracking, right? And you know, this is not all that, it can be considered trivial. I mean, be able to track personnel is one thing. But it's another thing to identify where that personnel is in context with their geography and what could impact the safety, for example, of that personnel that may not be inherent in the sensor data itself. And that's one of the things that Esri provides additional value on top of things like personnel tracking. It's keeping our people or personnel safe. There's other things that we do as well when it comes to resource optimization or asset tracking or entity tracking, right? The idea here is to monitor, manage, and optimize these assets in context of their geography. What is around them? How can we better understand what is it that makes our assets deteriorate over time, which may not be captured in the sensors that are on those assets themselves? It's about geographical context of monitoring, managing, and optimizing assets. Infrastructure protection. This is another critical one. Most of Esri's business is with government, and government is on all levels: federal, provincial, state, local government, municipal government. All of these governments have infrastructure that they need to protect. And how can you protect that information unless you understand what's happening around that infrastructure? So again, in context. And the same thing applies to things like SCADA integration and operations monitoring, the agricultural world, crop monitoring, air quality monitoring. All of this is important, or cannot even be conceived without the understanding of geographical context. And then there's my favorite topic, right? Connected vehicles. If you think about all the sensors that are on a connected vehicle and all the sensors that are on the infrastructure around that connected vehicle, by the way, it's increasing every single day, which I find extremely exciting. But how do we make sense of all that information, right? There's sensors all over the place. And in order to make sense of them is to attempt to try to unify all that information into one. And what better way to unify that by thinking about a unified map that can be used by all sorts of players and stakeholders in this industry. There is so much ahead of us when it comes to IoT and the sensor world, which is why I believe the science of where that Dave is talking about and this power of ArcGIS, if you haven't heard about it before, which you're about to, how can these things really help us improve the value that's delivered through these use cases? Right, Dave, to take it away.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Arif. And so all these use cases can be really well addressed by ArcGIS Velocity. And really, this is what I wanted to start talking about, right? And the release of ArcGIS Velocity is quite timely to help out with the use cases, Arif, that you just talked about. And so if you think about all of these different use cases that you just explained, you realize that to really take advantage of the data that's being produced by the sensors and these IoT devices, there are four fundamental things that you need to be able to do. And so the first thing is the ability to ingest data that's being broadcast by all these sensors. And certainly in some industries, the rate at which this data is increasing dramatically. The second thing that you need to be able to do is to be able to analyze that data, right? And get some real-time and historical insights from that data. The third component is the ability to trigger alerts as that data comes in, right? So a good example of that would be geofencing. If, let's say, for example, a vehicle crosses a perimeter, you want to be alerted by that. So you need to have that kind of capability. And then the last thing, of course, is the need to be able to take action whenever it's necessary. And so ArcGIS Velocity has been specifically designed to meet those challenges and provide you with a framework for all of that to happen. So what we're going to do in the next slide is get into ArcGIS Velocity and explain some of the fundamental components of that technology so you get a better sense, right? And that'll help put things into perspective when we move forward into talking about what customers are doing with it and giving demonstrations. So let's flip over to the next slide and I'll walk you through at a high level what ArcGIS Velocity is. So here in this slide here, off to the right, and you've got a depiction of the ArcGIS Online Cloud that's there. And you can see where ArcGIS Velocity sits. And it sits, not surprisingly, just on the edge of that cloud, so to speak, right? And it acts as an enabler. It enables you to easily bring the sensor data into the ArcGIS environment for geospatial processing. And what that means is it works with sensors that are being deployed out in the field and that are connected to IoT cloud frameworks in the likes of, for example, Azure or Amazon Web Services. So what happens is, in this case, Velocity can subscribe to or query these platforms directly without requiring developer integration. So we're not talking about a developer world. We're talking about just configuring those connections to these data providers. But if you're not working with IoT platforms, you can also connect directly to those sensors, connect directly between sensors and ArcGIS Velocity through something as simple as just a REST endpoint. So there's a couple of things that form the whole functioning environment of Velocity that are important to understand. And it really is three things. And the first thing is the concept of feeds. And feeds is what allow users to receive the sensor inputs. And sensor inputs could be devices, but it can be systems, right? And it can be messaging queues also. And these are user configurable components to make these connections to the real-time data. The second component is the real-time analytic capability. And that's what allows the users to perform the real-time data processing of all of those feeds. And it also implements the ability to include things like triggering alerts and actions and things of that nature. And the third and really important component is, of course, the big data analytic capability, which really allows users to access and analyze big data repositories of historical observations and perhaps extract things like patterns in the data. These analytics, in turn, generate geospatial content. Content in the form of things like stream layers, it could be feature layers, and it could be map and image layers, for example. And all of these can be leveraged in the ArcGIS platform in things like client applications, APIs, or desktop applications. And all of these can serve to drive additional insight and situational awareness. Now, one last thing that I'll say from a technology perspective that's important to understand about Velocity. And that is, it's a software as a service product or offering. And underneath the hood of that, it runs on a Kubernetes container-driven architecture. And what that means is that provides for a scalable and resilient architecture. And it's completely and fully managed by Esri. And so for you, what that means is it takes away the whole complexity of configuring, maintaining a suite of on-premise servers. We do all of that. We take care of that in cloud for you. Okay, so that's just about as far as I wanted to go in terms of getting a little bit more technical about ArcGIS Velocity. The main question is so, okay, that's great, Dave. What does that do, however, for myself and my business, right? And so you heard me talk about the pair of glasses analogy. So let's get back to that. So if you take a look at a pair of glasses, there are two main components, right? There's the frame and then there's the lens. And in that analogy, the frame here would be like the foundational data and the tools that you use on a day-to-day basis. What we provide is the lens. And what that means is we're providing you with the ability to extend your data reach to include additional potential value-add data sources, along with also some tools to process and analyze all that information and visualize the results in a sharply focused, meaningful, and understandable way that only a map can convey. That's the true power of what we do, is providing that lens, right, for you. So in other words, in this context here, that means going beyond the IoT data and extracting new and meaningful information for both you and your customers. So in essence, it really is all about seeing what others can't, which is the title of today's presentation. So Arif, that feels like I've been talking quite a bit. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about what some of our customers have been doing with ArcGIS Velocity technology.
Thanks, Dave. So I love that analogy, by the way. The frame and the lenses is beautiful. And I think I can actually frame, sorry for the pun.
That's right.
this next use case to help with that analogy. So I think everyone here is probably familiar with UPS. They're one of the world's largest parcel delivery companies, right? Courier companies. And so one of the things, the reason we're bringing UPS up is because what they've been able to do with location information and their telemetry technology. So you can imagine that all these vehicles are tracked as they're going about their business throughout the world, throughout the city. They are delivering at an incredibly massive pace. If you look at some of the statistics, in 2016, UPS delivered 712 million packages globally. That's, before the current 2020 situation that we're in right now. They were delivering a lot, and they continue to deliver record-breaking amounts of goods to you and I together. And so if you think about the amount of time that a courier spends on the road, it's pretty phenomenal. So the telemetry that supports UPS and folks like UPS is one thing. They can actually track where those vehicles are. And that would be the frame that helps courier companies understand where they are today. And if we put a lens on that frame, there are certain things that we'll be able to pick up. Like, for example, through that lens, UPS discovered that a left turn is more expensive than making 3 right turns. So what does that mean? That means that if you're actually making a left turn, it might be more efficient to make 3 right turns, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but through this lens of understanding the geography and the context around all these couriers, they've proven that it actually is more effective. And this is known as the Orion program. And UPS has been deploying the Orion program for years. And through this program, they've been able to save something like $50 million annually. And the credits are something like 100 million miles that UPS has saved, 10 million gallons of fuel, 100,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions, and as much as $400 million worth of maintenance on their vehicles. The result is outstanding. And all of that came from a decision to do something initially counterintuitive, but through this frame and lens analogy that Dave described for you, the telemetry data that came in that UPS uses to track its vehicles, combined with geographic context and understanding what is happening around those vehicles, help them save real dollars in their business, which resulted in further efficiencies that helps them deliver to their customers more effectively. Dave, I'll hand it back to you for the next customer story.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Sarif. And yeah, I really like to talk about this next customer that's called Seattle City Light. They are the 10th largest public power system in the U.S., and they serve about 460,000 customers, be it in the residential, commercial, or industrial world. Right? And the reason why I like to talk about this story is because they're using GIS to do exactly what we're talking about, which is the lens of the power to communicate. And that's really what they wanted to do with this technology, especially during power outages. And so this is a story where what they're doing is they're making use of our technology to help them stay on top of grid events and customer concerns, all of this in real time. And so they're monitoring a whole bunch of different things at the same time. But when an event occurs, they're pulling in data from all kinds of different sources using the Velocity technology, whether that be information that's coming from their outage management system. Social media also is what they're tapping into. Things like weather data. They're tapping into all of these and using the technology to aggregate that, apply some analytics to it, and generate a map that really communicates really well between the staff as well as their customers. And so, for example, they can mine social media, and what they do is they look for specific terms, right, that relate to the utility itself. And whenever that happens, or whenever someone communicates via social media about the utility, then the staff gets notified in real time, and they can therefore put it up on a map and therefore start acting upon that. And so the data itself is presented in a map dashboard kind of view, and it shows when and where the customers are engaging with the utility. And they're sharing that information internally, and they're sharing that obviously with the public in a way that allows them to be that much more effective in their way of communicating with the public. So it really is interesting to see how in this case they're using the power of the map to communicate, but in the background it's that ArcGIS Velocity that's pulling all that together and applying the analytics in favor of better communication and outage management response. So Arif, I'll hand it over to you to talk about the next one, which is another interest of you in the transportation world.
My favorite topic,
yeah,
connected and autonomous vehicles, right? Just a little aside, I drive an old vehicle, but it's 6 speeds, manual transmission. It's got the third pedal. I love it. And my wife's always telling me, I don't get it. You love driving so much, and yet you can't wait for the robots to take over. doesn't make any sense. No, I think it does make a lot of sense. Anyways,
Yeah.
it's back to the story. This is really exciting because the frame in this story is the partnership that Esri's formed with Mobileye. And if you're not familiar with Mobileye, just think about it as the artificial intelligence-based detection of objects that are in the front of the vehicle or around the vehicle. So using this technology, of course, this partner can identify, is it a child walking across the car or walking across the road in front of the path of the vehicle, or is it another vehicle? Is it a work zone? We can figure all of that stuff out using edge computing right on the vehicle. Now let's put the lens into that and take that information and put it on the map, literally and figuratively, because that vehicle is on shared infrastructure. There are other vehicles also around that vehicle. And so if you can share that information and put it in context of geography, in context of all of the other sensors that are also cohabitating that infrastructure with that vehicle, think about the power that unveils. How useful would that be to emergency services if they were actually to be able to get to their destination faster because of information that's collected from these edge computing devices and then put back into the community on the map in geographical context so that everybody else in the community can benefit as well? Isn't that a story of progress? Isn't that a story of how technology and autonomous vehicle technology can actually support more than the vehicle itself and actually help all of us evolve as communities and smarter cities, as the coin term would phrase? I think it's phenomenal to bring all of that together into a common, unified map so that everyone can have better situational awareness that honestly was just previously unavailable. It's pretty powerful when you think about it. So I have a quick demonstration. I think we've got a minute or two to share on this quick demonstration. I'm just going to give you a little bit of insight into, a little bit more insight into how this actually works. So let's see this demo quickly.
Cool. Let's do that.
Okay, so here's a very quick demo to highlight some of this in action. So what we're looking at right now is a map of the city of Ottawa in Canada. And you can kind of see a few different colors there on the roads. This was an experiment, so this is not a production site, but it was an experiment that kind of that demonstrates something really powerful. The way these roads were collected, the data on the roads was collected, was actually through Geotab devices. We were able to collect not only the location of these vehicles, aggregate them so we can actually see the streets, but importantly, collect the vertical accelerometer data from that Geotab device in order to infer something called road smoothness. We can actually get an idea of how smooth these roads are. So at the bottom, I have this little slider that shows, I can actually filter out some of the higher vertical accelerations and the lower ones. And if I move the slider, you'll start to see the less bumpy roads or the more smooth roads disappear from my map. And what's going to be left are some of these roads that have the most bumpiness to them, or the most rough roads. Do you think that this would be important to the city? Absolutely, I think it would be as well, because now it's a almost real-time picture of the status of the roads. Now, like I said before, this was an experiment, so the data that's supporting the road roughness is actually a little bit older. It's a few months old, so it's not real-time, but there is more real-time information here as well. If I keep sliding the slider down, something else is going to pop up. Through the magic of velocity, we're actually able to get a live feed now of the real 311 calls going into the city of Ottawa. And if I zoom in a little bit, you're going to see some of these calls, and I can click on them and find out that, oh, there was actually a pothole on the road reported at Main and Riverdale. And according to the city, it's in progress. A service request has been assigned. So this is another set of data coming directly from the city, combined with road roughness information that came from the Geotab devices that were going around Ottawa. Now, as I said, the road roughness information is a bit dated, and the pothole information is actually happening right now. So they're not going to really correlate. But imagine if we had real-time Geotab information of road roughness correlating with this pothole information. How useful do you think that would be for the city? Pretty profound, isn't it? I think it is too. All right, so that's it for the demonstration. I hope that gave you a bit of a glimpse into what ArcGIS Velocity and the power of geographic context and Esri can actually do for some of the end customers that we were talking about in the video. So I think that's pretty much it for our time. You can feel free to reach out to myself or Dave if you have any questions, but Dave, why don't you wrap up this presentation for our audience today?
All right, thanks, Arif. So folks, we're really excited about the release of Velocity in such a timely manner, especially where more and more of our customers are starting to experiment and educate themselves in this whole world of, IoT, real-time and big data analytics. And it really is truly a world of discovery, and we're here to help you harness the power of these different components, which is the IoT component, the analytics component. And we're here to help you do that through the science of where, right? So again, the analogy of the lens that comes to mind here. And the whole purpose is to ultimately have you discover and see what others can't in what you already have, right? So apply that technology to what you already have, reach out, connect to other sources, and let's explore and see what else you can get that's of value for your business. And so on behalf of Arif and myself and Esri, thanks for sharing this time with us here today. We'd like to also thank Geotab for hosting the event and inviting us to participate. We really appreciate it.